part of what's so extraordinary about this moment is that people are starting to get the sense that the common good is really something we can plausibly work for.
You know, it's not just about Barack Obama, it is about the people.
Something happened that really did shift the political landscape.
There's going to be change for all people.
He's done so much to mobilize people who are glued to their, computer screens. Now's not the time to diss, to hate on the folks that are newly coming up.
We have to be wise enough to reconsider the tactics that we use as we go forward.
I mean, it's great he's there, but he's just one person. It is still this large institution, and he's going to need the country behind him to make the changes.
We're in a unique and dangerous time, and I don't think it's a time for cynicism. I don't think it's a time for complacency, because we can't afford it.
We can really decide together what we want, because if we don't work together, we won't go far. The people united never will be defeated.
You know, I think it is a great time. It's a great time in American history. It's a great time in world history.
Everybody's been swept up in hope and how do we live to the best of ourselves.
It makes our work, I think, a little bit more hopeful. There's a ton of things that, with having this new administration come in, is that there's all these opportunities.
We're making the transition from being an emergency brake to being the accelerator, which is kind of exciting, because that's what we want. We want to be moving things forward. We don't want to just be going backwards less fast.
He wasn't the person that I voted for, right? But I am excited about him and his wife and his 2 daughters being in the White House. I'm really excited about the picture of the Black family that they're putting out there.
It's very easy to dismiss the consequentiality of the victory and fall back into sort of a cynicism and say, oh well, look, he's a compromised centrist politician, some of which may be true. But it's also somebody who really did bring out a grassroots movement that we've not seen in electoral politics, certainly not in my lifetime.
There were a lot of aspects of his campaign that was very reminiscent of the left. The fact that, they went out and had thousands of people out on the streets registering people to vote, going everywhere. And the fact that his campaign was in every single community, and they were knocking on doors, they were calling people. They used all the things that the Black Panther Party used and other organizations used in the 60s and 70s, particularly when we were running people for political candidates.
One of the biggest things that I've seen, especially as a media person, is just how effective Barack Obama's campaign was in getting out the vote using social networking sites and using the internet. I mean, he really is our first internet president.
Obama can go directly to people for money. He can go directly to people for popular support. He doesn't have to rely on the media to get his message out, because he's got millions and millions of names on the internet, and he's got videos that go viral all the time, and so forth. So there's an accountability there as well.
Who do they owe their victory to? It's grassroots social movements, it's young people, it's African Americans, it's Latinos, it's union and environmental activists. It's a fundamentally different constituency.
People of color, it's clear that they support Barack Obama, because every of these groups believes that he will support their own agenda, right? And I see that a lot of Latinos were participating in the electoral process.
It's not a good time in the world. It is a very, very dangerous time for any number of reasons, any one of which on its own could be catastrophic. There are all these different crises that for 8 years have been exacerbated by the person in the world who has the single most power to do anything about them, which would be the President of the United States.
I think we came very, very close to losing democracy in the United States. And I think it's just terrifying how close we came to that.
The pie is not big enough for anybody, but they keep making it big enough for what's going on now in the country, is bailing out people that should not be bailed out. What about the indigenous people?
What has happened in the 10 years through the Reagan administration, through the Bush administration, that we have not really gained much, and so really it's not too far for us to go back to reach on some of that unfinished business. I mean, things don't change overnight.
It's a new era, but it's not a shock that we're in a new era. Backbone Campaign's actually been anticipating this over the last a little bit more than a year, and we've been talking about moving from transforming and helping the movement to transform from being an opposition movement to being a proposition movement.
Most of what you were doing is pushing back and trying to block the worst of it with mixed success. Now it's in a different situation where you're actually trying to say, what do we want to accomplish? How do you make that how do you get that accomplished? And how do you get an administration that's on some levels fundamentally sympathetic, tied to social movements, but is also, of course, subject to all the normal pressures that administrations are subject to? How do you get them to actually do what is good for the country and good for the planet?
It's going to be harder work now, because now we actually have to come up with real solutions for global warming, real solutions to the inequities that this last 8 years and the many, many years before have created in this country and around the world. Now we actually have to solve the problems. We are beyond perhaps having to simply name the problems. So that changes what we need to do.
For progressives and for activists, I think it's a whole new era of working together with people that I think, have a tendency to dismiss in the past, to say, oh, you're liberal, or, oh, your line is not correct, or, oh, I don't want to work with you, burn it all and start all over. We can't do that. We have to come to a point of compromise.
Well, we have some extraordinary assets to build from. For one thing, we have this now new energized generation of young people. We need to not only include them, we need to listen to them.
It's going to take everybody to think about this. I mean, not one person, but if you got a leader who wants to make change on behalf of the people of the United States, then there will be changes. And if it's going to be a kind of administration to follow the footprints of the previous administration, we're in big trouble.
I think it's a lot of energy right now, and people are participating in the political activities right now because they believe that it's time to change. But also, I see that they have a very high expectations.
Here's a guy coming into office that has shown a lot of potential. He probably has more upside to be a good president than anybody that we've seen in a long time. So if you frame it as, okay, we've gotten this guy into office, but that is only half of the equation. He still needs to be able to enact effective policies, and he cannot do that without our help. I think that's the pitch that we need to make. Not, he's going to fail us, he's going to be awful, and therefore we need to start marching against him right now. Because that's going to have a much more difficult time appealing to people who want to give him a chance.
There's a whole generation, a whole population of folks who, I think in previous presidencies, the ethic is you vote for this guy and then you leave, or you ignore it altogether and you just let things happen, right? There's disaffected folks, disenfranchised folks, apathy. But I think with this presidency, with this upcoming presidency, I mean, you have people who have voted him in and are actually interested to follow what happens next.
The most important thing that he's done already is empowered a lot of young people of color, particularly African American people, and not just young people, but people of color all across the map. And it also makes us feel that we got to step up.
People voted for change, and that's what was given and sold to the American people. And they're talking about themselves as progressives.
I think it makes it much more fluid. I don't feel like these more barriers put in front of us.
Well, the Duwamish tribe believes with new administration the doors are going to open for Native Americans, especially for restoration of treaty rights.
hopefully a strong participation of the state, right, will create more jobs, right, trying to renovate the infrastructure, and also hopefully we can recover our civil rights and our constitutional rights that was taken by the Bush administration.
Because this was such a clearly cross-racial movement to get Obama elected, I think we have the possibility to build on that trust, to build cross-racial social movements.
He's the first black president in a country founded on slavery. Yeah, that's a huge thing. You know, that's definitely, it's given a lot of people around the world inspiration, you know, and it's making us look better as a country. Yeah, you know, America isn't as racist as it used to be. Doesn't mean that because Obama's the president that racism doesn't exist anymore.
There's a chance to have a president that is open to what's going on in the progressive movement. You know, that I think that is really very deeply galvanizing. And despite that, though, I am concerned about some of the things he hasn't mentioned. Like, he hasn't talked about Katrina and Rita. You know, poor people in general haven't been talked about. I'm not sure if he's going to go as far as I would like him to go. And I think that's where the responsibility of the left, as you want to call it, I think that's where we have to step up.
My fear is that, you know, there will be a sense of complacency that may happen for folks on the left and for activists and organizers. And you know, my caution is that, you know, hey, remember, I mean, it was President Clinton, you know, a supposed lefty, that ushered in things like NAFTA.
Even though Bill Clinton was fairly conservative for a Democrat as governor of Arkansas, he was fairly conservative as a candidate. He made no promises that he would be anything but fairly conservative for a Democrat as president. But you saw after 12 years of Reagan and Bush Sr. such an enormous sigh of relief that that era was over, that people threw up their hands, said, hallelujah, we've got a friend of ours in the White House. He's probably secretly progressive. He just couldn't say that during the campaign. We're all going to go home and rest on our laurels now and watch all the wonderful change unfurl. We saw almost no popular resistance when he decided to end welfare as we know it. And I'm concerned that the same thing might happen with Obama.
And Obama's solutions are going to be solutions that are huge compromises. And those huge compromises are not enough.
There's a lot of possibilities of what he can accomplish. Of course, those of us on the left are pessimistic. And rightly so. We should be pessimistic because particularly those of us who, you know, came through the 60s and 70s, all the things that we have seen, all the lies that we've heard politicians tell us has given us this pessimism that we have. But at the same time, I think there's many of us that feel that there's some hope.
We don't want to simply go to sleep and say everything's fine. And we also don't want to sort of do the sort of knee-jerk left reaction that says, oh, immediately our job is to point out 17 ways that he's really a hypocrite and no one should have any hopes and everything's really going to be terrible, and immediately jump into that cynicism because we have our own form of leftist cynicism.
People don't want to hear that right now. People want to hear that people are enjoying this moment. And it doesn't do us a great deal of help. It doesn't bring people to our cause to be the buzzkill.
Getting the troops home is actually a really high priority.
The anti-war movement needs to address Afghanistan. Afghanistan isn't the good war, you know, just like Iraq isn't either. And it's not in our interest in this country to be in these other countries occupying these people illegally.
Why does the United States get in other people's business when they have so many problems in the United States? Take care of your people here. I'm not even talking about the Native Americans. The thing I really object about is the homeless. We should not have any homeless people anywhere in this country.
For me, like, that would be my greatest criteria, like what is really going to change for the people on the bottom.
If we were wildly successful over the 8 years of an Obama presidency, we would have the United States acting much more as one nation among many that we're actively cooperating to try and solve some of the pressing global issues of our time, rather than the exceptionalism that has marked American foreign policy, and for that matter, American domestic policy, for much of the last century.
We're going to have to really struggle even more than we ever have in the past to make sure that health care for everyone, not just actually frankly for the middle class, but for everyone, is something that is a really high priority, that dealing with our huge prison populations is something that people deal with dealing with all of the social ills that have come down upon us because of the last 8 years. All of those things are likely to get cast aside because we're trying to deal with the economic crisis.
How do we start reclaiming or claiming the economy and saying we need to have this work for real people? It needs to be working within our ecological constraints. It needs to distribute wealth instead of concentrating wealth. It needs to distribute power instead of concentrating power. This is the kind of economy that we need to have.
The community wants immigration reform, definitely, right? We want one that will respect the working rights, that will respect the human rights, right? And who will provide a path to the citizenship for people who wants to be American citizens.
I think it'd be great if, if Obama could undo the whole No Child Left Behind, since that seemed to galvanize the whole WASL issue here in the state. I think that would be really great, because I think we need to put the focus back on education and not money and buildings and real estate and school structures,
Well, clearly healthcare is another one of those issues that has got to be at the top of the list. And again, we know we have a dysfunctional healthcare system. I don't have to repeat what everybody knows about how poorly we're served by what we have right now, and how poorly compared to the rest of the world, where they can give everybody coverage in the industrialized world at a fraction of what we're spending.
We've been waiting in line for a very long time to have our quality of life improved. And I think that today that this transparency is going to be much more easier for families to really say, this is what we need.
On election night, you had more people in the world, you had more energy of the people in the world that was concentrated on that one event than I think we've ever had in the history of the world. And I think that energy, the energy of the people, can actually influence and help to push him towards where he really needs to go. And that's what we can do. This gives us the time to get ourselves together and start really putting together some really good grassroots organizing in our community.
First 100 days when Obama took the power will be the most important days, is when people really need to mobilize to really make sure that their agenda will be taken consideration seriously by the new government. But also I believe that we need to have a discussion in the community level about what are our priorities, right? Behind our ethnic group or our gender is where we want to move together to create a better society and more equal society.
I do think we need to regroup. I think we need to hear from lots of people, but I think we also need to create some forward movement right now.
One of the things that is should be a principal focus of our movement as we go forward is to attack the collusion and the cohesion between corporate and elected power.
We have to continue to read and be educated and continue to have these kinds of forums in terms of talking about surplus and learning where slavery comes from, and we have to always really look at how it affects both race, class, and gender.
It's incumbent on us to organize and get out there and create the kind of popular mass movement that can affect change, not just in terms of public support, because we already have the public on our side on a lot of these issues, but in terms of changing the public policies.
There's a huge amount of work to do in bringing issues to real urgent issues to the attention of the public, framing them, demanding political action, and opening up the space for, in the case of climate change, for Obama not just to do a little bit, which certainly will happen, but to actually do enough to meet the extremely acute challenge of the crisis. And he can't do that on his own.
We're in a multiple crisis period. It's affecting all of us. It's affecting even people who are our political opponents. Somehow we need to pull together if we're going to get through this. It's not that we have to give up our own agenda. It just means that we expand our sense of what our agenda is, and we expand our sense of we.
Now's the time to embrace folks, to come together, have these great coffee meetings or bus stop discussions with folks, and to really keep the conversations going, keep the dialogue going, and to use that energy to keep the administration and our locally elected officials accountable to what they say, and to a progressive agenda that is socially responsible and that improves our standing in the world and in within our borders.
History moves in different time frames, and King described the long arc of the universe. The arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And that's the way that we work day after day to make change, often in the very most consequential ways. One of the things that I think citizen movements need to do in this period is to shift the definitions of what's possible.
My hope is that with Obama's energizing campaign and people more interested in government, that halo effect will ripple towards other aspects of the progressive and left community.
The other thing that we have to do now is not rely on a government, but actually continue to build not only the grassroots movements to change how we're governed, but also to be building at home the models ourselves, to take control back ourselves, to be making sure that the world that we live in is the world that we've built, not that we rely on our government to be creating.
Real fundamental change happens through movements. Howard Zinn said, it doesn't matter who's sitting in the White House, but who's sitting in, who's out in the streets.
The only way you can keep democracy is if people continue to stay engaged. Generation after generation, you can never assume it is taken care of.
If you don't fight for your rights, you might as well just go home and have tea.
But now we're gonna rise up together. We're gonna rise up with hope in our hearts. We're gonna rise up together. Land of the free, lifting up democracy. Yeah.
On this day, we gather because we have chosen hope over fear, unity of purpose over conflict and discord. On this day, we come to proclaim an end to the petty grievances and false promises, the recriminations and worn-out dogmas that for far too long have strangled our politics.
We're gonna rise up together. We're gonna rise up with hope in our hearts. We're gonna rise up together. Of the free, lifting up democracy.
Why am I so depressed and confused all the time? It's like I don't care about anything anymore. All I want to do is watch Fox News all day. I feel like I don't even know what's going on around me.
If you are experiencing symptoms like these, you could be suffering from corporate fasciitis. Corporate fasciitis is a disorder that affects millions of Americans each year. You are not alone.
Doctor, what causes this sickness?
Corporate fasciitis is an MTD. It's a media-transmitted disease. Let's take a look. First of all, let's open up the mouth. Say ah.
Ah.
Good. Any other symptoms?
I feel afraid all the time.
You see, as mainstream media enters your head, the misinformation releases a contagion. This contagion triggers a process similar to brainwashing. This disorder, which spreads throughout the central nervous system and eventually throughout the entire body, causes extreme cynicism and social lethargy.
So my television's poisoning me.
Not just your television, unfortunately, but also the radio and print media.
So what can I do, doctor?
Well, fortunately for you, there's an easy solution. What you need is Indie Media Presents. Why, with a weekly dose of independent media from PepperSpray Productions, you can be back to your old self again, enjoying life, and most importantly, thinking for yourself.
Now I feel hopeful again, and I can take an active part in my community and the world around me. Thanks, Indie Media Presents.
Warning, regular ingestion of independent media may cause increased consciousness, acute political awareness, counter-hegemonic activity, enlarged cranial capacity, excessive hopefulness, and bloated critical thinking abilities. Ask your doctor if Indie Media Presents is right for you.
We must take back what is ours.